Takuto is a lonely, terminally ill patient with no friends, and his family only cares about the life insurance payout they'll get, so no one ever comes to visit him in his hospital room. His only comfort is the world of Eternal Nations, a civilization-building RPG which he plays all the time because he has nothing better to do. One day, Takuto falls unconscious because of his illness, and the next time he opens his eyes, Takuto finds himself sitting on a stone throne in the middle of a forest, and while he is wondering what's going on, he sees a woman emerge from the forest, calling him her king. This is Atu, Takuto's favorite character in the world of Eternal Nations, but even though he's excited to see her in real life, he doesn't know how he should react. Fortunately, Atu is self-aware of the fact that she was part of a game, and she knows exactly who Takuto is, the legendary player who claimed the top of the user rankings year after year. She remembers every single playthrough she and Takuto have gone through, so she knows him better than anyone, and they are both happy that they finally get to meet in person. Takuto asks Atu if she was the one who summoned him here, but in truth, Atu has no idea what's going on here either. She simply found herself in the middle of this forest all of a sudden, but she is pretty sure that this isn't the afterlife. If she has to guess, she thinks this world is similar to Eternal Nations, but they can't be sure of that yet. Either way, Atu thinks this is a great opportunity, so she asks Takuto if he would like to start over with her and build a kingdom just like old times. Takuto likes the sound of that, so he agrees to work together, and Atu goes through the whole opening sequence, although it's a little embarrassing now that they are actually standing next to each other in person. The first order of business is figuring out where they are, so Takuto uses magic to summon a scout. But now that he is actually seeing the scout up close, he is disgusted by how ugly it looks. There's nothing he can do about that. Their Minara is a civilization that rules over darkness and evil, so his early game strategy is to avoid garnering too much attention so they won't get into any conflict, at least until they are strong enough to defend themselves. That's where this bug comes in, so Takuto orders it to go take a look around the area and notify him of anything important. At first, the bug just stands there and stares at him, but then Atu sternly reminds it that Takuto is its commander, so the bug takes off running to complete its task. Takuto was a little concerned that he might not be able to control his troops in this world, but it looks like everything still works the same as it used to. He can also see what the bug sees to some extent, so he should be able to figure out where they are soon enough. Anyway, moving on, it's time for them to think about their next steps. Takuto started off with 200 mana points, and he had to use 100 mana points to summon the scout, so he only has 100 left. He plans to build a settlement to act as their base of operations, which will cost him an additional 20 mana, but after that, he won't have much mana to work with. He was honestly hoping to create a warrior to fight for them in case they get attacked, but that really isn't an option anymore. Atu assures Takuto that he doesn't have to worry because she will fight for him, but to be honest, that isn't very reassuring coming from her. As part of the hero unit, Atu will grow stronger as more time passes, but right now, she pretty much has the strength of a regular person, so there's not much she can do to help. The bug is still zooming through the forest, and thanks to its scouting, Takuto now has an understanding of what this area looks like. But he's a little surprised because even though this entire area is a forest, he hasn't seen any animals or monsters yet. Atu assumes all the animals must be hiding since forest terrain provides a lot of hiding spots, but Takuto's main concern is that if he doesn't find some animals soon, they'll probably have to spend some mana to get some food. Atu apologizes to Takuto since she feels bad about not being of much use, but he tells her not to worry about it because simply having her by his side is a huge morale booster. Hearing that makes Atu really happy, so she tells Takuto she's very grateful for his kind words, but Takuto is having a hard time getting used to how expressive she is now that she's a real person. Just then, the scout finds something interesting, so it gets Takuto's attention and shows him a dark elf settlement in the middle of the forest. It's not far from Takuto's current location, and it looks like there are a lot of elves gathered together. Atu is relieved that it's just dark elves since they have a tendency to lean towards neutral evil, so they won't be opposed to the Minara Kingdom. But Takuto still thinks this is terrible because he can't have another civilization so close to his. His plan was to avoid war by staying hidden for as long as possible, but that won't be possible with the Dark Elves so close. Atu suggests that the two of them should ditch this place and head to a new location, and Takuto agrees since they haven't actually built anything yet, but before that, he wants to observe the Dark Elves a little more and survey the area to see if there's anything useful nearby. Suddenly, Atu senses someone's presence nearby, so she and Takuto turn around and spot a group of Dark Elves emerging from the forest. The Dark Elves seem just as surprised to see them because they had no idea there were other people in this forest. The Dark Elves only came here because they were driven out of their homeland, and with nowhere else to go, they were forced to head into this accursed forest. The journey has taken a toll on the Dark Elf children, and at this rate, they aren't going to last much longer. A small group of dark elves was sent out to go looking for a food source, and the group leader is certain that there must be something edible around here since there's so much vegetation. But Emil is very nervous. She has heard rumors of a dangerous forest at the edge of Idaragia where an ancient evil was sealed away, and she is worried that they might get attacked. The leader assures her that those rumors are nothing more than superstition, because if there really was an ancient evil lurking in this forest, then the trees here wouldn't be able to grow so well. Although he can't deny that the forest is really creeping him out for some reason. As soon as Gio lays his eyes on the Takuto, his heart sinks because what he sees before him is a manifestation of pure evil and malicious intent. He wants to run away, but he is worried that any hasty actions might put him and his people in danger, so he slowly approaches Takuto's throne and kneels before him to show his respect. He introduces himself as the head warrior of the Mazaram Dark Elf clan, and he apologizes for entering the forest without Takuto's permission. Atu has no idea why the elves are acting so respectfully, but she just goes with it and demands to know why the elves would trespass on Takuto's land. Jia begins explaining how his people used to live in the Central Plains and were a peaceful tribe, but Atu ain't listening to all that, so she tells Jia to keep his story short. Jia apologizes and quickly explains that the elf tribe was persecuted and driven away from their land, forcing them to flee into this forest. He doesn't understand why his people had to suffer such harsh treatment when they never did anything wrong. They always aim for peace, but they were attacked and killed due to the prejudice against their race. Takuto takes one look at Jia and notices that he looks really thin, so Jia explains that he and his people were barely able to escape as their village was destroyed, so they didn't have time to pack supplies. And since they've been on the run non-stop, they haven't had time to look for food. In fact, that's why Jia and his team ventured out on their own since it has been 5 days since any of them have eaten anything, but they haven't had much luck in finding edible plants or animals. Takuto feels bad for them, so he decides to help them out a little and uses some of his mana to create some apples for them. Jia is surprised when he sees apples rolling on the ground because he has never seen anything like it. He's hesitant to try it since he doesn't want to be rude in front of a being like Takuto, but Emil and the others are so hungry that they don't care. They all bite into their apples, and it's the best thing they've tasted in a long time. Takuto even creates some pears so the group will have enough to eat, but Jia is still in shock from Takuto's kindness, and he doesn't know how to react. Fatu yells at him, saying it's rude not to accept the gift that Takuto so graciously provided for them, but Jia isn't hesitating because he is skeptical of the food. He presses his head against the floor and says he really appreciates Takuto's generosity, but there are children of the clan back at camp, and they have grown very weak due to the lack of food. They'll die soon if they don't get something to eat, so Jia asks for permission to take this food back to his clan so he can feed the children. Takuto feels bad for the children who are suffering, so he decides to go the extra mile for them and creates a ton of different food for Jia to take back with him. Although, Atu doesn't approve since something like this will cost a lot of mana. The Dark Elves are all in disbelief at the sight of so much food, and they are even more shocked when Takuto tells them they can have it all. For years, the Dark Elves have been oppressed and forced to live in the shadows, so no one has ever lent them a helping hand like this before. The Dark Elves express their deepest gratitude towards Takuto and carry the food back to the camp. At the camp, the Dark Elves are all on the verge of giving up, but a few of them remain hopeful that Jia and the others will return with some food. Just then, everyone in the village smells something delicious, so they all turn around, and to their delight, they see Jia and the others carrying bags of food on their backs. They are all relieved that they don't have to go hungry anymore, and everyone is praising Jia for finding so much food. But when they ask him where he got it, he just says he got lucky, leaving out the details of his encounter with Takuto. Later that night, Jia is staring at the fire while deep in thought when all of a sudden he is approached by the clan leader Molter. He tells Jia that he did a great job today and that the fruit he found were amazing. But he notices that Jia doesn't seem all that happy about it, so he asks him what's wrong. After a brief silence, Jia explains that he encountered a legendary being deep in the forest and he doesn't know how to feel about it. Molter asks what legend Jia is talking about, so he explains that Emil mentions something about a powerful being that was sealed away in the accursed forest. Molter has heard of the legend before, and he is shocked to learn that Jia actually met the King of Ruin. He explains that according to the legend, when the world becomes too prosperous, the King of Ruin will descend on the land and destroy everything, forcing all civilizations to start over from scratch. In all honesty, Molter can't guarantee that the legend is true, but he is inclined to believe it. He asks Jia if the being he met called himself the King of Ruin, but Jia doesn't remember him saying anything like that. Although how terrifying he looked, a name like the King of Ruin is definitely fitting. Molter asks Jia if he talked to the King of Ruin, but Jia says it wasn't much of a conversation. The King of Ruin didn't say much, but he had a woman serving him who spoke on his behalf. From how Gia has described the encounter, Molter is certain that this being is bad news, so he asks Gia if he had to do something like sell his soul in exchange for the food. Gia explains that the King of Ruin didn't ask for anything in return, but Molter thinks that sounds absurd because what kind of evil being gives things out for free? Gia has no idea why the King of Ruin did it either, but if he had to guess, he would say it was mercy. He assumes that his grace must have sympathized with their predicament and offered aid to save them. Molter is shocked that Gia would call the King of Ruin his grace because that is a title used only to show the utmost respect. But Gia sees nothing wrong with addressing the King of Ruin as his grace because he is someone who deserves respect. Molter can't believe that Gia is actually defending the King of Ruin and asks if he has been hypnotized or something. But Gia points out that the only reason they are even able to waste energy arguing like this is because of the food that they were given by this so-called evil god. And it's not like Gia could have rejected the offer when they were so desperate for food. So what exactly did Molter want him to say? Molter realizes he has no right to judge Gia's decision to trust the King of Ruin, because given the situation, it was the best option. However, as the elder of this tribe, it is his duty to make sure everyone remains safe, so he says from now on, he will handle the negotiations with the King of Ruin. He has been alive for over 200 years, so he's sure he should be able to come to an understanding with the King of Ruin. Meanwhile, back at Takuto's camp, he is currently being scolded by Atu for carelessly wasting his mana on charity. She asks him why he would do something like that, but Takuto just says he felt bad for the elves and he didn't want to let their children starve. Atu understands that, but she reminds Takuto that they have barely started setting up their kingdom, so they can't be wasting their resources like this. She has a point there, so Takuto apologizes for not consulting Atu before using his mana, and he promises to make it up to her. But that aside, there's something that has been bothering him for a while now. He wasn't able to talk to the Dark Elves properly when they showed up because he was so nervous. Atu is surprised to hear that since she had assumed Takuto was playing the role of a disdainful higher being on purpose, but in reality, he's just socially awkward. Just then, the scout bug returns and it informs Takuto that the elves are approaching this area again. Takuto and Atu are surprised that the elves are returning, but he did give them more food than they could carry last time they were here, so he assumes they are coming back for the rest. Having different cultures nearby is bound to cause a conflict at some point, so Takuto really wishes the elves would just take the food and leave already. He could just tell them to get out of the forest, but that would require maintaining a conversation with someone other than Atu, and that's outside Takuto's skill set. Atu can see that Takuto is troubled by this, so she comes up with an idea and suggests that she handle all of the negotiations in Takuto's place. That way, Takuto will come off as a mysterious and dignified king instead of a socially awkward teenager. He likes the sound of that idea, but he asks if it's really okay for him to make her do all the talking. However, Atu said she's always happy to be of assistance, so she has no problem being Takuto's voice. A little while later, Molter and Gia arrive and kneel before Takuto. First, Molter introduces himself as the chief of the Dark Elf tribe, and he wants to offer his deepest gratitude to Takuto for providing his tribe with the food they desperately needed. He asks to know the name of their benefactor so he can properly thank him, and after a brief pause to confirm with Takuto, Atu announces that they are in the presence of the King of Ruin, Takuto Aira. Gia is stunned upon realizing that Takuto is indeed the fabled King of Ruin, but they can't be rude to him. So Molter once again thanks Takuto for his kindness towards them. Takuto is relieved that the negotiations have gone well so far, and since there's no conflict with the elves, Atu tells them to just take the food and get out of here. Both Gia and Molter are stunned when they hear this because they were totally expecting to have to pay some high price for receiving aid from the King of Ruin, so they ask Atu if it's really alright for them to leave without offering anything in return. But Atu reminds them they have nothing of value to offer in the first place. Molter really doesn't want to live the debt unpaid, since with someone as great as the King of Ruin it might end up costing their souls, but he can't say that out loud. Takuto can tell that things have gotten tense all of a sudden, so he calls Atu over for a sidebar. Atu is really upset with how stubborn Molter is being, and she is sure that the elves will end up causing trouble for them if they are left alone. So she suggests that they should just kill all of them and move on, but Takuto was actually hoping to build a mutually beneficial relationship with them. He figured out that Molter is uneasy about simply receiving aid for free, especially when it's coming from someone called the King of Ruin, so he suggests they should ask for some reasonable compensation to calm his nerves. Atu thinks it's a good idea, so she relays Takuto's decision to the elves, and Molter looks relieved, but Atu is still trying to figure out what to demand as compensation. She turns to Takuto for help, so he tells her to ask about the outside world. So Atu tells Molter that as compensation, he must provide Takuto with information about the world outside this forest, and he says he would be more than happy to oblige. However, Atu tells him that once he is done providing said information, he and his people are to leave this forest immediately. But that would mean the elves would be forced to wander without a home again. He asks Takuto to allow them to stay in the forest, but Atu immediately denies his request, and she tells him that if he values his life, then he had better not tell anyone of Takuto's presence. Jia is about to protest because the Dark Elf tribe won't survive if they are forced to leave the forest, but Molter stops him because they can't risk upsetting Takuto. They both get up and begin walking away, but as they are leaving, Takuto wonders to himself if this is really alright, because he doesn't want to force the elves to suffer, and just then, he comes up with a great idea. He calls out to the two of them and asks them if they want to become his citizens, but they are so stunned by the proposal that they don't know how to respond. Even Atu can't believe what Takuto just said, so she calls for another sidebar and asks why he would say something like that. Takuto explains that he was thinking of recruiting the Dark Elves with a refugee system, and now that he mentions it, Atu realizes it's not a bad option. Dark Elves aren't inherently good or evil, so they won't have any major conflicts with Takuto's evil-aligned kingdom. Plus, in the game, the main citizens of Minara were homunculi, and here they are ugly as hell, so he asks Atu if she really want to live in a kingdom that only had those things around. Atu is now on board, so she turns to Moltar and Jia and tells them that if they agree to become citizens of Minara, then they will be protected. Moltar asks what exactly that means for them, and to put it bluntly, Atu tells them that from the moment the Dark Elves join Minara, they will be considered evil. Whether they choose to join Minara or not is entirely their decision to make, but she assures them that if they do join, it will at least be interesting. A while later, Takuto and Atu are walking over to the Dark Elf camp since they finally made their decision, but Atu is a little upset that it took them so long to agree. Takuto, on the other hand, expected them to take a while to decide, especially after Atu told them they become evil if they join Minara. Eventually, they arrive at the Dark Elf camp, and upon his arrival, Molter announces to everyone that their new king has arrived, so they all now down and clear a path for Takuto as he walks toward the throne they made for him. Some of the elves are terrified when they see Takuto for the first time, while others seem excited, but those who got a little too close end up passing out from the sheer magnitude of the dark energy coming off him. Jia warns everyone not to look directly at Takuto because he might think they are being rude, but Takuto doesn't really mind. Once Takuto is seated on the throne and all the Dark Elves have been gathered, he officially declares that everyone present here will be a citizen of Minara from today onwards. That's pretty much it, so all the Dark Elves are now Takuto's citizens, but Jia was honestly expecting more since Atu did say they would become evil. Just then, an immense amount of hatred begins flowing into Jia's body as he recalls all the injustices he and his people have suffered, and it's the same for all the other members of the Dark Elf tribe. And after being reminded of how they've been persecuted, they are all relieved and excited to have someone like Takuto looking after them. A few days go by in the new kingdom of Minara, but things are not going well for Takuto at all. He was just taking a look at the map that Molter gave him, and he becomes incredibly frustrated because this is the worst RNG he has ever gotten for his starting location. Atu asks him what's wrong, so he points to the map and explains that to the north of this forest, there's the holy kingdom of Quolia, which worships the god Arlos, and the elven kingdom of El Na, which worships nature, and both of them lean heavily into the good alignment, so if either one ever found out of the evil nation of Minara, then Takuto and Atu would be toast. There's no way they could ever defeat powerful nations like that in a head-on confrontation, and to make matters worse, this accursed forest doesn't have a single harvestable resource, so the difficulty here is just unfair. On the bright side, they do have the Dark Elves now, so they should be able to make up for the current weaknesses of the kingdom, and speaking of the elves, Atu hears them approaching and she seems pleased because they are probably here to deliver some valuable information. A little while later, Molter and Jia arrive, and this time they brought Emil with them. Jia explains that Emil is very smart, and she is well versed in lore and foreign affairs, so he is sure that she will be of great help with Takuto's plans. Takuto is pleased with the extra help, but he can tell that they are all still really nervous around him, so he has Atu tell them there's no need to be so formal around him. Moving on, Atu informs them that Takuto has made a few decisions regarding the administration of Minara, so starting today he will be appointing Moltar and Jia to key positions. Molter will handle the management of the nation's matters, and from what Atu has heard, Molter should be able to use magic, so she is expecting a lot from him. As for Jia, he will be appointed as the warrior captain for the entirety of the Minara army, and he will have full authority over the troops. Jia says he is honored, and he promises to slaughter any and all who stand in Takuto's way without a second thought. Takuto is weirded out by how serious Jia looked while he said that, so he has Atu tell everyone that he prefers peace, so they should avoid starting conflicts unless absolutely necessary. Gia can't believe the King of Ruin is actually a pacifist, but anyway, Atu tells everyone to get some rest for now because they will soon begin constructing houses in the forest. Molter thanks Atu for her consideration, and he tries to make himself look better by telling her that the knowledge he possesses will make him far more useful than a brute like Gia. But Gia starts arguing that an old man like Molter won't be able to help much with construction anyway. Atu isn't really interested in their argument, but it seems like they are eager to start working, so she asks Takuto if it's alright for her to order them to begin the construction immediately. Takuto sees no problem with that, so he says they can start collecting materials, but he also wants to do it in a way so they can gather the materials without destroying the forest. Atu thinks it's a great idea, so he asks Molter if it's possible, and he says they should be able to pull it off if they make most of the houses out of the hollows of giant trees. Takuto is pleased to hear that, so he tells them to get to work as soon as they can, but he reminds them to reforest as they go. The three of them are about to get to work, but they are a little confused because they don't understand what Takuto meant by reforest. Takuto is surprised that they don't know what reforesting is since, from what he has heard, the people of this world should have already unlocked the fortified architecture tech tree. Atu asks them if they at least know about military magic or the 6 great elements, but Molter has only ever heard of 4 great elements. As for military magic, Emil doubts that anyone from the other nations would know about it. So Takuto and Atu realize that the people of this world are surprisingly underdeveloped. As it stands, the magitech of the Dark Elves is far below Takuto's expectations, but if the rest of the world is similar in terms of development, then Takuto thinks they should be able to catch up to them soon. But that will be a lot later in the future, so for now, Atu explains what reforestation is. It is basically just replanting trees as you cut them down to maintain the forest, but normally trees would take decades to grow naturally, so in this case, reforestation refers to a special technique that uses magical elements to accelerate growth. She says it is a technique that was personally created by Takuto, but that's a big lie because Takuto didn't invent anything, but it would be awkward to tell the truth now. Emil is really excited by the idea that Takuto possesses incredible knowledge, so she asks if he was the one who created the apples and grapes that he gave them. She even planted some of the grape seeds and they've already begun to sprout, so she can't wait to see how well they grow. Takuto and Atu both go silent as soon as Emil mentions that she planted a grape seed because the thought hadn't even crossed their minds. Fruit like grapes and apples don't exist in this world, yet Takuto was able to create them using his emergency production skill, and if his hypothesis is right, and the skill shouldn't be limited to just food. Takuto tested out by summoning a coin, and just as he expected, it worked flawlessly. With this new discovery, as long as he has the mana for it, he can create anything from gunpowder to base metals and even petroleum. So taking over the world may not be as hard as he thought it would be. The Holy Empire has caught wind of a dark presence in the forest, so the Holy Saint, along with the bishop and a few knights, are sent out to investigate. The knights have all heard stories about the saint possessing special powers, but from what they've seen so far, she just looks like an ordinary girl. However, when they encounter a group of goblins, she demonstrates why she is so well respected within the church. Under the god Halos, evil creatures like goblins are seen as a scourge to be eliminated, so with one wave of her staff, she burns them all to ash in a blaze of holy flames. All the knights are stunned by what they just witnessed, so the cardinal explains that Solina's ability is part of the reason the empire has been able to maintain its peace with the elves and push back all the evil in Idorragia, which is why she is revered as one of the 7 great saints of the continent. Solina asks the cardinal if he has gotten any updates on the omen she sensed in the accursed lands, but the cardinal tells her that he can't simply send paladins to investigate that region. In their nation, showing any interest in the south is ludicrous, so there's no way the central church would permit the use of paladins to investigate without a good reason. Solina tells the cardinal that if he isn't willing to send any paladins, then she will go investigate it on her own, but the cardinal tells her she can't do that either because as a saint, anything she does will affect the church's reputation. He can see that Solina isn't willing to back down on this, so he tells her that he will send some of his personal troops to investigate, but as he is leaving, he curses Solina under his breath for being so difficult. Meanwhile, in Minara, all the Dark Elves have been working hard on the construction efforts, and they finally completed the throne room. Takuto is very happy since he doesn't have to sleep out in the open anymore, and his nation is one step closer to world domination. Just then, Takuto's administrators show up because they have a domestic affairs meeting scheduled for today, and they've got good news for Takuto because they finished designing the new set of clothes he asked for. This makes Takuto even happier because he was getting sick of wearing his pajamas constantly. Atu and the others are glad that Takuto likes the new clothes so much, but they've got pressing matters to attend to, so it's time for them to begin their meeting. However, Takuto seems a little distracted admiring his new fit, so Atu suggests they should just start the meeting without him. First off, Molter asks Atu what buildings they should start constructing since aside from the throne room, they haven't actually made much yet. They've already done preparatory work like leveling the ground and pruning the nearby branches, so Atu tells them they should start with a food production facility since keeping all their people fed is a top priority. Molter asks why they would need to worry about food when Takuto can produce it with his power, but Atu tells him they can't continue relying on Takuto to make food for them because what would they do if he wasn't around? Molter admits that she's right, so Atu says they need to get to work right away and pulls out this thing. Molter is horrified by what he's looking at, so he asks Atu what it is, and she tells him it's a flesh tree. That doesn't sound good, but the explanation is even worse because it's a special kind of tree that grows mysterious meat which tastes like human flesh. Atu says it's the first step in their food production plan, but Molter, Gia, and Emil all agree that most people won't want to eat something that tastes like human flesh, so Atu promises that they'll get other food sources eventually. For now, they'll need somewhere to store the tree's flesh, so Emil says she can work on building a storage house for it, and as if the flesh tree wasn't already disturbing enough. It also talks for some reason. The next thing on their agenda is research, because they need to acquire the latest technology if they want to advance quickly. Molter asks her what kind of technology they should prioritize, and Atu tells him magic technology is the way to go. Specifically, military magic. Normal magic allows a person to attack a dozen or so opponents at once, something that Molter is already capable of, but military magic on the other hand allows you to attack thousands at once and even change the terrain to give yourself an advantage. Molter is amazed to learn that such magic exists, and he is excited to learn as much about it as he can, so he says he will handle the research personally. Now all that's left is the military planning, and Gia immediately offers to start mobilizing an army, but Takuto stops him and says he doesn't actually want to put much effort into their army yet. Armies don't produce anything, they just consume resources, and right now, Mainara doesn't have enough resources to sustain an army. Besides, even if they did create an army, they are nowhere near strong enough to actually defeat anyone, so it would be pointless. Gia protests because as things stand, they won't be able to protect Takuto if he were to be attacked. And to make matters worse, Molter and Gia actually have bounties on their heads for being the leaders of the Dark Elf tribe, so they might get hunted down at some point. With things as they are, Takuto agrees that neglecting defense would be a bad idea, but he still doesn't want to spend all that money on making an army, so he says he will make a hero instead. Atu tells him that's a great idea because while a hero has a high production cost, it is a lot easier to provide for a single person as opposed to a whole army. Molter and Gia are confused, so they ask Atu what she means by a hero, so she explains that there are several heroes in Mainara who serve under the king. They are all powerful with special abilities, but they are also a bit crazy, so dealing with them can be annoying at times. There are several conditions that need to be met in order to summon a hero, but it should be possible to summon one soon with how much they've progressed. And as an added bonus, summoning a hero won't draw too much attention to them, so Mainara can continue to remain hidden. That pretty much settles all the concerns for domestic affairs for now. The happiness of the people of Mainara is very important to Takuto, because the happier they are, the more mana he is able to generate. Meanwhile, over in the Empire, the junior paladin Lonius is busy praying in the cathedral when the high paladin, Veldis, comes over to talk to him. Lonius asks Veldis to quiet down since this is a place of prayer, but Veldis just wanted to have a friendly chat with him since they were both assigned to the investigation. It's about time for them to get going, so Lonius gets up and Veldis notices that he's wearing his wedding ring as a good luck charm, so he must have a family waiting for him at home. Veldis asks Lonius what his family is like, so Lonius tells him he has a wife named Marcia and a daughter named Mina, but his personal life isn't important to their mission, so he doesn't plan to talk about it much. Lonius has heard rumors about Veldis being crude and ill-mannered, and the rumors were pretty accurate, but overall, Veldis doesn't seem like a bad guy and his skills are no joke, so he is a respectable paladin. Veldis begins complaining about getting assigned to a pointless mission like this, but Lonius reminds him that this mission is to investigate one of Saint Solina's revelations, so they need to take it seriously. Still, Veldis thinks it's weird that they were given such a lackluster team even though it's for a saint's revelation. Veldis and Lonius are literally the only paladins on the team, and the rest of the people are all mercenaries who are hired to fill in the gaps. The odds are looking great for them, especially since it's a mission to the southern forest, but Veldis just wants to get it over with so he can get home as soon as possible. Meanwhile, back in Mainara, construction has been going very well so far. This place is finally starting to look like a proper civilization, and the Dark Elves don't seem bothered by the flesh trees anymore. Takuto is really excited because seeing all this in person is a whole new experience compared to what he used to see when he played the game. Emil shows Takuto around and points to the residential area with mostly treetop houses. Since she's been focused on food production, she hasn't had much time to work on the homes. However, the flesh trees are growing in nicely, so the food storehouse should be complete soon. Meanwhile, Molter has been working on his magical research over at the Magic Institute he created, and most of the citizens who are talented in magic have joined in on his research. In addition, they also discovered a spring nearby, so they now have a secured water source, and finally, this building is the public office where the administrative meetings in Minara will be held. She would have liked to make the building a little fancier, but this is the best she could do with her current resources. Takuto is pleased with the initiative Emil is showing since she's handling things really well, and he is also glad to see that the Dark Elves who were on the brink of death when he first met them are now looking lively. Emil is a little nervous since she can't tell what Takuto is thinking, so she asks him if he is pleased with her work so far, and Takuto tells her she has done a great job. He says he is glad to have her as one of his citizens, and hearing such high praise from Takuto is the best thing Emil could have asked for, and she's so happy that she breaks down in tears. Once she regains her composure, Emil shows Takuto the flesh tree farm, and things have been progressing smoothly thanks to all the farming equipment Takuto provided them with. Although, Emil is still freaked out by the weird talking flesh trees, so she wants to move on to the water source she found. She leads Takuto and Atu out into the forest, but for some reason, things look a lot different from what they were before, and when they finally arrive at the spring, Emil is horrified to see that the water has turned completely black. Molter and Gia soon show up as well since they had heard that Emil wanted to build an aqueduct near the spring, but now that it looks like this, they don't think they can use it anymore. However, just when they had lost hope, Atu tells them that the water is still perfectly safe, and to prove it, she bends down and takes a sip from the water. The others are shocked that Atu would take such a risk, but she tells them to try taking a deep breath, and when they do, for some reason, the air feels better than normal. This is one of the benefits of the evil nation of Minara, because all land near the nation becomes cursed terrain, and it grants minor buffs to evil creatures, while applying penalties to neutral and good creatures. That means while the water, air, and land might look dark and deadly, all the evil citizens of Minara will not suffer any negative effects from it. There's just one minor problem with it though. A cursed forest is pretty noticeable, so it kind of ruins the whole strategy of staying hidden. It won't be that bad if the cursed region remains small, but as Minara expands, it will become easier for their enemies to discover them, so Gia and Molter think it's time to start working on that army Gia mentioned before. However, Atu tells him there's no need to worry since a single hero is more than enough to handle any early game threats. Molter and Gia still aren't exactly sure what a hero is supposed to be able to do. Atu could give a long-winded stat explanation, but she thinks it will be quicker to just give them a demonstration. Tentacles begin to emerge from Atu's back, and she uses them to slice down all the trees around her in an instant. Molter and the others are in utter disbelief at what they've just seen, but Atu explains that she is also a hero, and since she has been here for a while, her strength is finally coming back to her. Although it's still nowhere near what it was in her prime. The important takeaway here is that heroes are incredibly strong, and they grow stronger with the passage of time, so as long as they don't face any significant threats for a while, Takuto is confident that they should be alright. But that aside, he's a little upset at Atu because she didn't need to destroy those trees just to prove her strength. Molter and Gia are still in awe of the power that Takuto possesses, and they are eager to build a palace befitting his majesty, but Takuto thinks that would be a waste of resources, so he tells them he doesn't need one. Molter, Gia, and Emil insist that it is absolutely necessary for Takuto to have a castle because they would feel too guilty as his citizens if he didn't, and since they are making such a big deal about it, Atu tells Takuto that he should probably just have one made to satisfy their wishes. Takuto admits that a palace would be cool, and he was hoping to make a floating castle someday anyway, so he might as well get started on it since things are going so smoothly. But unbeknownst to him, the paladins are slowly making their way towards the Dark Continent, and there's bound to be a confrontation when they discover Minara. Along the way, Veldas tells Lonius that he did a great job hiring this many mercenaries, and Lonius says it wasn't easy to pull off, especially since most of the mercenaries in the area are currently stationed up in the north. For some reason, a group of barbarians suddenly appeared in the northern province, and they'd begun raiding nearby villages, so the Saint and her army were sent to deal with them. However, the situation up there is still really bad, so one of the mercenaries says they are glad they aren't the ones who have to fight the barbarians. Another mercenary says it might actually be worth it since he heard that the pay up there is really good. But there are also rumors of a witch being seen up there, and none of them want to deal with that. Veldas tells them there's no point in talking about it now since whether the witch in the north is real or not, there's no way they'll run into her since they are heading for the southern accursed lands. The group soon arrives at a nearby town to spend the night, and while they are all having dinner, Lonius begins asking the mercenary Bargo for more details regarding the witch he talked about earlier. Bargo says it's just a rumor he heard saying that a witch was responsible for all the chaos in the north, but Lonius thinks that's preposterous since there's no way a single person could have done all that, especially when the saint was dispatched to deal with the matter. Bargo agrees that it sounds far-fetched and he personally doesn't believe it is true, but better safe than sorry since facing a real witch would be incredibly dangerous. Speaking of danger, Bargo thinks it's strange that the kingdom dispatched 2 holy knights on such short notice, especially when their destination is the accursed lands, so he asks Veldis to tell him what exactly they are going there to deal with, because if it's something similar to a witch, then Bargo is backing out right here. Veldis didn't really get any details about what they would encounter in the forest, but he assures Bargo that it can't be that bad. If he had to guess, he would say it has something to do with the dark elves that flood into the forest recently, so the kingdom probably wants them to make sure the elves aren't causing any trouble. He's wrong that Lonius and Bargo fully believe him since dark elves are seen as dangerous assassins and curse users to the people of the kingdom. Lonius is concerned that if the dark elves are left alone, they might eventually grow strong enough to attack the kingdom, so he wants to commit some light genocide, but Veldis cuts him off and says this mission is just to investigate, so the second things get dangerous or violent, they are going to retreat. Bargo is glad to hear that Veldis is so sensible since he really doesn't want to be part of a mass killing, but Lonius doesn't understand why Veldis would turn down an opportunity to wipe out an evil race. Veldis simply says, "Ma'am, you've got a wife and kids and you really want to go into a genocidal battle for no reason." Even if Lonius doesn't care about making it home alive, the rest of the mercenaries here have families they would like to see again, so unless absolutely necessary, Veldis isn't going to put their lives in danger. Lonius still doesn't agree with the idea of letting the elves live, but he also wants to see his family again, so he decides to follow Veldis' instructions after all. Meanwhile, over in Minara, Takuto has summoned all his citizens to one place because there's something he wants them to witness. They're all really confused since he's just standing there next to a pile of the meat tree fruit, but then Takuto raises his hand and begins pouring mana into the fruit. Everyone eagerly watches to see what will happen, but to their surprise, right before their eyes, the pile of fruit transforms into a scout bug. Everyone is amazed by what they've just seen because Takuto basically created new life with the wave of a hand, and A2 announces that this is just a fraction of what Takuto can really do, so they should all continue devoting themselves to him. Afterwards, Takuto heads back to his throne room, and he is relieved that the people didn't ask him too many questions about the scout bug creation, because he honestly doesn't understand how it works. He and A2 just follow the procedure from the game to make it happen, but when you're looking at it in person, it's hard to believe that simply pumping mana into a pile of fruit would be enough to create life. Anyway, now that they have confirmed that they can safely create soldiers, A2 says they can move on to the next phase of the plan, creating a hero. It's going to take a while since Takuto is going to need to stockpile his mana to complete the ritual, but once it's done, they'll be practically unstoppable. A2 is still really excited about it, so she asks Takuto which hero he plans to summon first, and Takuto says he's going to go with Isla, the queen of insects, since she has the most early game benefits. Isla is able to boost the power of all the insect-type soldiers nearby, so with her around, all the scout bugs will become extremely effective fighters. Additionally, Isla can produce larva soldiers to help in combat as well as construction, so she'd be perfect for increasing the development of Minara. A2 praises Takuto for coming up with such a solid strategy, but aside from Isla's unique capabilities, she's also the only hero who doesn't have a problematic personality. As for the other heroes, one is obsessed with conquering the world, while the other wants to watch it all burn to the ground, and Takuto really didn't want to have to deal with that right now. With that said, those two are still really powerful, so he is going to have to summon them eventually. He just hopes that the heroes don't cause any problems when he summons them because he would like to live a peaceful life in this world. Meanwhile, back with the Holy Knights and mercenaries, they have just run into an angry hill giant and dealing with it won't be easy, so Lonius tells all the mercenaries to get ready for battle. However, before any fighting could begin, Veldis tells everyone to stand down and let him handle it on his own. Lonius tries to object, but Veldis tells him it will be quicker if he handles it on his own, and they don't have much time to waste here to begin with. Veldis walks up to the giant and begins saying a prayer, so Lonius explains to the mercenaries that Veldis is using the secret technique of Quolio, which allows one to use prayers to imbue their attacks with divine power. The giant attempts to strike Veldis with its club, but Veldis is easily able to slice the club in half. The power that divine arts will grant varies from knight to knight, but for high-ranking holy knights like Veldis, his power is equal to that of a lesser dragon, so the giant doesn't stand a chance. After Veldis has slain the giant, Lonius begins praising him for his immense power and says that with Veldis and their team, they can definitely handle anything they encounter in the dark forest. However, Veldis doesn't look pleased and tells him that they can't be sure of anything yet. Back in Minara, Takuto is busy munching down on a burger. But Atu is a little concerned because he has been eating nothing but junk food ever since he got here. She doesn't plan to stop him, tells him he should be eating healthier. But Takuno spent his last life in the hospital eating nothing but nutritional slop till he died. So now he just wants to eat some tasty food. Just then, he remembers that he has something important he wanted to discuss. So he asks Atu if she can summon Jia and Molter for a meeting after this. Atu agrees to do so, but she's curious as to what this meeting is about, so Takuto explains that thanks to the additional scout bug he got, he can now see more of the forest, so he wants to ask Jia and Molter for advice on how they should handle it. Atu asks Takuto if he is referring to the village outside the forest, and he confirms it. His main worry is that because the village is so close, they are bound to find out about the existence of Manara sooner or later. Fortunately, it doesn't look like the village is part of the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, so they are likely neutral, and that means it will be possible to negotiate with them. However, if anyone else were to show up, it would be really bad since coming all the way out here would mean they came on a mission. Takuto tells Atu that there's no need for her to worry so much since there's no evidence that anyone has found out about their existence yet. Atu jokingly warns him that saying stuff like that never ends well for the main character, and Takuto is laughing along with her. But he suddenly stops laughing when he realizes that people actually did show up. And even worse, it looks like a group of armed soldiers, so they definitely aren't here for peaceful discussions. Takuto wants to avoid standing out too much, so he asks Atu to go deal with the soldiers. He also asks her to try being peaceful first, but if that doesn't work, then she's free to use as much violence as necessary. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the Holy Expedition is getting ready to enter the forest, but before they could walk in, Veldis notices something off behind the tree line, so he tells everyone to stand back. A few moments later, Atu emerges from the forest wearing a cloak, and both Veldis and Lonius are surprised to see someone living in there. Veldis asks her to identify herself, so Atu lies and says she is a humble dark elf who is living in these woods alongside her people. Lonius still has dark elf genocide on his mind, so he is about to provoke her, but Veldis stops him and changes the topic. He tells Atu that he and his party are just here to investigate the forest, so he asks her if she would be willing to let them in. Atu politely declines their request, saying that the Dark Elves would rather not have their new home invaded for no reason. Lonius feels offended that a lowly Dark Elf would dare to decline a request from holy men of God, but before he can say anything more, Veldis tells him to shut his damn mouth before he causes trouble. Veldis is already suspicious, but he tries to convince Atu to let them in by telling her about the divine revelation they got from the saint about a great calamity in this forest. Lonius starts freaking out because divine revelations are national secrets, yet Veldis just revealed it to a random woman. Veldis once again tells him to shut up, but informing others of a divine revelation without permission is against the Holy Order's rules, so Lonius says he's going to tattle on him once they get back to Qualia. Veldis tells Lonius he is free to do as he pleases, and then he turns back to Atu to ask her if she's willing to let them in now. However, Atu still refuses, and she tells Veldis that there's no need for them to search the forest, because there's nothing dangerous or evil in there. That is a straight-up lie, but Veldis decides it's not worth arguing over it here, so he tells everyone that they are going home. Veldis isn't an idiot. He knows Atu is shady AF, but he also knows that when a single cloaked person confidently comes out to confront an entire army, you're probably better off not messing with them. The safest option here is to return and regroup before making any moves, but Lonius is too impulsive to understand that this is a tactical retreat, so he accuses Veldis of abandoning the mission and says he is stripping him of all authority. He then commands the mercenaries to follow him because they are going into the forest to investigate, and unfortunately, Lonius was the one who hired them, so they have to listen to his orders. Personally, I'm quitting on the spot after seeing Veldis so freaked out, but Lonius orders the men to seize Atu immediately for disobeying his orders earlier, so the men start closing in on her, and despite Veldis' warnings, they are no longer willing to listen. Atu is disappointed that her attempt to get them to leave peacefully failed even though she tried so hard, but well, is what it is. In the next moment, Lonius wakes up on the ground and finds himself covered in blood because Atu has stopped holding back. And while he is somehow still alive, the rest of the mercenaries were not so lucky. Veldis yells for someone to go report this to the kingdom, but Bargo tells him all their messengers were already taken out by Atu, and the mercenaries that managed to survive aren't fast enough to make the trip in time, especially not with Atu in attack mode. He tells everyone to get their weapons ready because now they have no choice but to fight. He orders them all to unload everything that got on her, so the mercenaries fire all their arrows, but Atu effortlessly blocks them all, so she remains unharmed. The last thing Veldis wanted was to have to face someone like Atu, and Atu is just as disappointed as he is. She makes it very clear that this is all Lonius's fault because she would have been perfectly happy to let them leave if they had just agreed to leave the forest alone, but Lonius had to act all righteous, so now she has to kill him. Lonius realizes he messed up badly, so he's finally willing to listen and asks Veldis if he knows what a toot is. Veldis had his suspicions when they first encountered her, which is why he wanted to leave without a fight, but now that he has seen her true form, he is certain that a toot must be a witch. A witch is a Calamity-class monster that is officially recognized as a national threat. A toot is way too strong for the mercenaries to stand a chance against her, so Veldis tells them to stand back so he and Lonius can handle her. They both charge at Atu and recite their prayers to boost their attacks, and at first, Atu didn't think they took them seriously, so she just blocks their strikes and calls them weak. But to her surprise, they actually managed to cut through 2 of her tentacles, so this may not be as easy as she thought it would be. She figures out that their holy magic attacks grant them bonus damage against her, and Veldis assumes that once they've cut all of Atu's tentacles, she will be completely helpless. Atu doesn't want that to happen, so she takes 2 of the mercenaries hostage and decides to use them as meat shields to force Veldis and Lonius to stop attacking. However, Veldis tells Lonius that if they don't stop Atu here, then it is entirely possible that she may target Qualia in the future, so for the good of their nation, sacrifices need to be made. Lonius doesn't like it, but he agrees with Veldis, so the 2 of them continue their charge and cut through the hostages, along with Atu's last 2 tentacles. Atu is surprised that they were willing to kill their allies so easily, and for a second, she looks like she might actually be in trouble, but this was all just a game to her. A second later, several tentacles emerge from the ground, and Veldis is impaled several times. With his final breath, he tells Lonius to run away, and shortly after, Atu finishes him off with a tentacle to the head. Lonius can't believe what just happened because he was sure they had cut off all of Atu's tentacles, but while that may be true, Atu doesn't recall ever saying she couldn't just grow more. In fact, she could summon as many as she wanted this entire time, so she has just been toying with them from the beginning. After what they just witnessed, all the mercenaries have lost the will to fight, and Atu doesn't look like she's in the mood to spare any of their lives, so Lonius tells them all to run away as fast as they can, hoping that if they all scatter in different directions, then at least one of them will be able to make it back to the kingdom and tell them what happened here. All the mercenaries immediately drop their weapons to start running away, and Atu doesn't really feel like chasing them down, so she just lets them go. Although she wishes they had just done that from the start since it would have saved her a lot of trouble. Lonius decided to stay behind to keep Atu busy, so he swings his holy sword at her. But to his utter shock and dismay, she blocks it with the same holy sword technique. He doesn't understand how an evil creature like her could possibly have access to holy techniques, and normally it wouldn't be possible. But when Atu killed Veldis over there, she absorbed all his experience and sword techniques, so now she is just as skilled as he was. She starts attacking Lonius with Veldis' techniques, and she can't help but praise Veldis because he was truly a man worthy of being called elite, but unfortunately, he ended up dying because Lonius couldn't keep his damn mouth shut. She then taunts Lonius by asking him if he even considered whether he'd make it back home to his wife and daughter, but Lonius never mentioned that here, and that's when it dawns on him that Atu didn't just take Veldis' skills, she also took all his memories too. And if Atu is truly capable of doing something like that, then that means she will only continue to grow stronger the more she kills. She asks Lonius if he wants to know the final thoughts that went through Veldis' head before she killed him, and like the kind man he was, Veldis was thinking about the survival of his men right up until the moment he died, but the same can't be said for Lonius. He tries to defend himself and says the rest of the mercenaries have already fled to report what happened, so the mission wasn't a total failure. But Atu simply tells him that all those mercenaries are dead. She said she didn't want to personally go after them, but that doesn't mean she's just going to let them leave, and she also never said she was alone either. She had already instructed the Dark Elves to make sure no one would leave this alive, so the second the mercenaries fled, they were hunted down and killed. Lonius falls into despair at the realization that he is the last one left, so he takes a desperate swing at Atu's head, and she is loving every bit of his suffering. It doesn't take long before Atu has subdued Lonius, but before killing him, she decides to rub salt in his wounds by telling him exactly how things would have gone if he had listened to Veldis. They would have all returned home safely. Lonius would have gotten to see his wife and daughter again, and they would have spent the rest of their lives blissfully unaware of the existence of any calamities in the forest. However, Lonius chose to do something different, so now she's going to kill him, then she will kill his family too, just because. Atu could read his mind to find out exactly what his family looks like and where they live, and she says she's totally petty enough to do it. In fact, she might as well kill all the people in the villages that Lonius passed through on his way here as well, and as they are all suffering the most agonizing deaths possible, she will make sure to let them know that this was all caused by Paladin Lonius. Lonius screams out and begs Atu not to do it, but she is starting to get bored with tormenting him, so she eventually stops taunting him and just ends his life to shut him up. Once Lonius is dead, Gia approaches Atu to inform her that he and his men have successfully killed all the mercenaries who ran away, so no one will be reporting any of today's events. Atu thanks him for his good work and asks him to take care of disposing of the bodies as well, but before she leaves, Gia says there's something he wants to ask her. He wants to know if she really plans on following through with her plan to kill Lonius's family and everyone he has ever spoken to, but she says she was just saying all that stuff to scare Lonius, so she doesn't actually plan on committing genocide. Besides, that would be a lot of work, and she doesn't like getting into fights unless she has to. That aside, she can't afford to waste much time chatting here because she has something she needs to talk to Takuto about immediately. Before the fight began, Atu heard Valdez call her a witch even though she's classed as a hero, and he also mentioned something about a witch up in the north, but Takuto has never heard of a witch class in the game before, so Atu believes this world must be different from the one they are used to. Takuto already had a feeling that might be the case, so while most of the game's features still work the same, it would be best if they assumed the underlying mechanisms are entirely different. Fortunately, the difference doesn't seem to be entirely negative since Atu's ability to absorb skills from the people she kills was improved. Now she can obtain a portion of that person's memories as well, and thanks to that, they were able to gather a lot of information regarding Quelia's current situation from the investigation squad that was sent here. Thankfully, the city of Quelia seems preoccupied with the northern disturbance, so they won't be able to turn their full attention to Minagra anytime soon. Although the fact that the investigation squad was wiped out is sure to draw suspicion, so Quelia is bound to take some sort of action to find out what happened. Takuto is aware of that, but Quelia still doesn't know anything about Minagra yet, so as long as the people in charge aren't complete idiots, they aren't going to attack right away. Right now, Takuto is much more concerned about that northern disturbance and the witch that is causing it. Atu tried digging up as much information on witches as possible from Valdez's memories, but he didn't know much about them to begin with. However, his memories were very clear about one thing. The witch in the north was able to cause military-scale damage to the Qualian army on her own, and her name is Arikino. Meanwhile, up in the Northern Territory, Arikino has just destroyed another village and she is getting ready to move on to the next one. So she brings all the villagers she killed back to life as her undead servants. Takuto has no idea what Arikino's abilities are, but the fact that she is capable of such destruction despite only recently showing up leads him to believe that she might have come here from another world just like him and Atu. If that's true, then things are going to get a lot more complicated, so Atu asks him what they should do. Judging by the destruction that Arikino caused, she is most likely evil-aligned, so it's possible that they might be able to get along with her. She asks Takuto if they should try making contact, but he doesn't think that's a good idea since they have no idea what her personality is like. Atu is disappointed that all this trouble had to start when things were finally going well here, but Takuto reminds her that Arikino is all the way up in the north, so she's not going to be their problem to deal with anytime soon. However, all these new threats have made it clear that Minagra needs a stronger line of defense, so Takuto plans to create another hero as soon as possible. He was initially going to choose Isla, but with all the recent developments, he might need to go with something more combat-oriented. Additionally, he is going to have to reevaluate his strategy of staying hidden. Because of uncertainties like the witch at play, he's going to need to form an alliance with a nation. Obviously, Qualia isn't an option after what Atu did to their paladins, but the nation to the east of the forest should be a good match since they are neutral and they haven't had any contact with Minagra yet. So once the palace here is complete, Takuto plans to go investigate that country, and while he's there, he will find out whether it'd be possible for them to work together. Meanwhile, over in the city to the east, they are currently under attack from the barbarians, so their staff bearer uses a bolt of lightning to wipe them out. All the citizens begin praising her for protecting the city so easily, but she tells them it's too early to celebrate because it looks like they have a lot of work left to do. Back in Minagra, Atu and Takuto are done talking, so she's about to leave, but before she does, she has something she needs to apologize for. She knows Takuto doesn't like unnecessary violence, but she got a little carried away while she was dealing with a paladin. But Takuto just stares at her blankly and asks why he would care about that. Atu is instantly reminded that while Takuto may be kind, he is also the embodiment of evil, so there's not much that would bother him. Before long, Takuto's palace is finally completed, and this marks the start of the advancement of his kingdom. He is excited because he has always wanted to have a giant palace, and Atu assures him that one day it will be large enough to pierce the heavens. However, all this talk about the palace leads Atu to realize that even though Takuto is their king, he still doesn't have a single attendant serving him. He hadn't really given it much thought, but it would be weird for a king not to have personal servants, so Atu asks him if he has any preference so she can find one for him. Takuto sheepishly says he's fine with anyone as long as they are easy to talk to, because he is a terrible communicator. In fact, he hasn't actually held a conversation with any of the dark elves since he got here, but Atu thinks that's mostly because he looks like a mass of negative energy to them. Regardless, she tells him he doesn't have to worry because she has the perfect plan. Takuto doesn't like how enthusiastic Atu is being, but he decides to let it play out to see what she does. Atu immediately summons Gia, Molter, and Emil, and she commands them to gather all the young girls in the village because Takuto desires them. Both Takuto and Gia can't believe what they just heard, but Gia wants to give him the benefit of the doubt, so he asks Atu why she is issuing such a command. Atu asked for young girls because she figured it would be easier for Takuto to practice having conversations with them, but instead of just saying that, she boldly declares that Takuto likes young girls. This is going way too far, so Takuto stops Atu from saying anything worse and tells her to explain things without making him sound like a lullamancer. After hearing the full story, Molter and the others are relieved to learn that Takuto just wanted a servant who would be easy to talk to. And the reason he specifically asked for young girls is because the kingdom is short on hands, and he didn't want to take valuable laborers to make them his servants, so children who aren't able to do any work yet were the best options. Molter and the others are impressed by how much thought Takuto put into this, so they agree to bring him the children, and Takuto is looking forward to having people to talk to. However, there is one thing he failed to take into account when he came up with this plan, and that's the fact that he still looks like a walking calamity to normal people, so the children burst into tears the second they see him. Takuto feels really bad after that whole mess, so Atu asks Molter if there are any kids who won't scream at the sight of the king, but given the circumstances, Molter can't think of anyone who would be suitable. Gia suddenly speaks up and asks if Takuto has met the twins yet, but says he didn't present them because he didn't think they'd be appropriate servants for Takuto. To put it bluntly, they have a bit of a troubled past, so he was worried that they might offend the king in some way, but at this point there aren't many options left, so Atu tells him to call them here anyway. A few moments later, the twins arrive in the palace, and they introduce themselves as Karia and Maria. But while Karia is speaking with proper respect, Maria is casually talking to Takuto like he's one of the homies. Atu could tell at a glance that these kids have gone through a lot, so she asks Karia how she got those sores on her body. Karia tells her it was caused by a disease, and Walter goes on to explain that Karia suffered from a plague a while ago, and even though she has been cured, the scars caused by the illness still remain. Atu then asks what happened to Maria, so Karia explains that Maria had to go through something very cruel, and she's never been the same since then. Atu asks what Karia meant by something cruel, and without skipping a beat, Maria says she ate her mother. That's way worse than what Atu had imagined, so she asks Moltar for an explanation, and he's not proud of what happened back then, but it was the only way. The people of the Dark Elf tribe have not once forgotten the noble sacrifice that Maria and Karia's mother made for them. After hearing that, Takuto recalls that the elves had to travel for a long time through treacherous terrain when they were driven out of their home, and in tough situations like that, starvation becomes a major concern. So sacrifices had to be made. It looks like being forced to eat her own mother shattered Maria's perception of the world, and while it's a good thing that she doesn't seem to fear Takuto at all, Atu isn't sure she'd be a good attendant for him. However, while Atu was lost in thought, Maria started walking over to Takuto, and when she gets close to him, she says he looks white to her. Takuto is surprised to hear that since most people describe him as the embodiment of darkness, but it's different with Maria. He asks her if she'd be willing to become his attendant to take care of him, and Maria says she'll do her best, so Takuto officially appoints her as his servant and a candidate for the leadership of Minara. Atu is amazed because that was the longest conversation Takuto has ever held with someone aside from her, but even though Maria seems to be on board, Karia hasn't said much, so Takuto asks her what she thinks of his proposal. Karia says that as Maria's little sister, she has a duty to stay by her side at all times, and if Maria wants to become Takuto's attendant, then Karia will do it as well. Takuto is glad to hear that, so he tells them that starting from today, they will be in charge of taking care of him, but Gia and Molter seem a little uneasy about his decision. After everyone else leaves, Molter approaches Takuto and says there's something he needs to tell him about the twins. Ever since their mother died, they haven't been able to feel even a shred of emotion, so it's like their hearts have been closed off entirely. Takuto having them as his servants is bound to come with several challenges, but Molter asks that he treat them with tolerance and patience until they come around. Later on, Maria and Karia begin their official duties as Takuto's servants, but problems arise almost immediately, because when Maria tries bringing him a glass of water, she accidentally trips over her own feet and dumps it all over Takuto. Karia offers to wipe him down and apologizes for Maria's mistake, because this isn't the first time this has happened, but Takuto says he's not upset about it. A few moments later, Atu comes in and she's disappointed to see that Maria has messed up yet again, but Takuto tells her to take it easy on the girls. Atu can't stand how often they messed up, but if Takuto doesn't want to punish them, then she can't do anything about it. She tells Takuto that he has a meeting to attend, and as his attendants, Maria and Karia will be required to attend as well, so they had better be on their best behavior. The meeting begins shortly after, and the first one to make a report is Emil. She is in charge of the construction department, so she tells Takuto that with the palace complete, they have a lot of workers free at the moment, and they also have a ton of resources left over in storage, so she thinks they can start working on another project soon. Takuto and Atu agree with Emil's assessment, so they tell her to start construction on a clinic as soon as possible since they need a way to take care of the health and safety of the citizens of Minara. Emil says she will get to work on it immediately, and now that construction concerns have been addressed, Atu asks to speak with the person in charge of resource collection. However, Emil is also in charge of that, so they might need to consider hiring more staff soon. Anyway, she reports that the collection of food and materials is going smoothly, and thanks to Takuto's help, they have been able to acquire daily necessities that they wouldn't be able to produce on their own. But that consumes a lot of Takuto's mana, so they are going to need to find other methods to acquire those things soon. Using emergency production so often isn't ideal, but right now it's a necessary expense, so Takuto says it's fine for them to keep relying on him. But they are going to need to prioritize buildings and research to increase Takuto's mana production. Atu thanks Emil for her hard work, and now that resources have been discussed, it's time to discuss the magic research, so Molter stands up to give his report. He informs Takuto and Atu that he has successfully created military magic. Although at the moment, he is the only one capable of using it, but he is sure that with enough training, his subordinates will be able to do the same eventually. They may even be able to cast powerful magic using the ruined mana that is produced by the palace, but since Takuto has stated that he doesn't want to start any wars, they probably won't get many chances to use it. For now, Atu asks Molter to focus on researching the 6 major elements in the magic skill tree, because those will be the most useful to the development of the nation. Finally, she calls on Gia to ask him for an update on the status of their army, and he informs her that the army currently has 5 scout bugs at its disposal. For the most part, they have been busy surveying the uncharted territory of the accursed land, but the land outside the forest is mostly plains, so they can explore that region without risking being spotted. And since stealth is one of Minara's top priorities right now, the scouts are limited in how much they can explore. Atu says it's fine since they've already gotten a detailed report on the entire forest region, so she tells Gia to assign the scouts to routine patrols around the perimeter of the forest. Gia asks if she's sure she wants to assign all the bugs to patrols, and Atu can tell that he's worried about their military strength, but she says she is more than enough to handle any threats that come their way. Besides, she and Takuto have already decided to create a new hero, and Takuto tells them that he's going to summon Ezla after all. He asks if they managed to collect all the resources necessary for it, and Molter tells him that the lumber and rations are ready and waiting, but there's still the issue of the large mana requirement. After a lot of arguing and compromise, today's meeting finally comes to a close, and Takuto is pleased with how well everyone has been fulfilling their roles. After that, he returns to his throne room, but as he is walking, Maria bumps into him and throws the meeting documents all over the floor. Karia apologizes on her behalf again and goes over to help pick the papers up, but then they accidentally rip one of the documents in half. They both look up at Takuto, expecting him to be angry at them, but he simply tells them they don't have to worry about it and goes to sit on his throne. Maria suddenly goes up to Takuto and asks him if he's a bad person, and since his alignment is evil, he technically is a bad person, so she asks why he hasn't killed him yet. They've been messing up constantly and doing things that would get a servant executed, yet Takuto keeps showing them mercy and they don't understand why. Takuto asks them what they think the difference is between a good person and a bad person. And as far as Maria is concerned, a good person is someone who only does good things and a bad person is someone who only does bad things. However, Takuto tells her she's only half right. A good person is indeed someone who always has to do the right thing, so they can't lie, steal, or kill people without reason. But a bad person doesn't necessarily always have to do bad things. They are selfish by nature, so they just do whatever they want without regard for the feelings of others. And in the case of Takuto, he wants to be kind to them, so there's nothing wrong with being lenient when they make mistakes. Besides, he already knows they have been messing up on purpose the entire time in an attempt to make him angry. Maria and Karia admit that they were hoping he'd get mad and kill them if they kept causing problems for him because they don't think they deserve to be alive after what they did. Takuto understands why it'd be hard for them to forgive themselves after what happened, and he can't personally relate to their struggle, but he is sure their mother made that sacrifice because she wanted them to live on. Takuto wants them to know they are free, and the best thing they can do right now is live their lives to the fullest so their mother's sacrifice won't be in vain. It's not going to be easy to move forward, but he will be by their side every step of the way. The two break down in tears from Takuto's kindness and hug him tightly, and a few hours later, Atu comes in and finds both of them asleep on Takuto's throne. She's a bit jealous of how close they are to Takuto, but there are more important matters to discuss, so she tells Takuto that the report on the city nearby is complete. The city is called Dragonten, and it is a part of the multiracial neutral nation known as Fornon. Since the city has many different races living there, Takuto thinks it should be easy to negotiate with them, but he is also a bit concerned by the fact that Dragonten was built in such a remote location. Atu informs Takuto that the reason the city was built all the way out here is because there's a dragon vein mine there, and dragon veins are particularly valuable because they naturally produce mana, so Atu suggests they should secure it as soon as possible. The report also states that Dragonten is currently under attack from barbarians like ogres and goblins, and they seem to be struggling to defend themselves. Takuto asks her if Dragonten has received any aid from its homeland, but as far as she can tell, no reinforcements have been dispatched so far, so the situation isn't getting better. Given the state of Dragonten, Takuto assumes there must be at least a few refugees, and if they welcome those refugees into Manara, then they will be able to simultaneously increase their population while also building a relationship with Dragonten. And before long, they might be able to claim the Dragon Vein mine for themselves. Takuto tells Atu to prepare an envoy immediately, but as they are on their way to the city, Atu's envoy runs into a group of beastkin out in the middle of nowhere and tensions run high. The leader of the beastkin, Tonukapali, is terrified by Atu and the others since they are covered in darkness so dense that it's visible to the naked eye. She is trying her best to keep things peaceful since her men are so petrified that they might end up attacking the two out of fear, and that might get them all killed. Atu is still under orders to keep the existence of Manara hidden, so she's getting ready to eliminate all the witnesses here. However, Pepe over here is too dumb to acknowledge the threat that Atu poses. He just casually asks for her name and starts a conversation. Something so bold and stupid that it catches Atu by surprise and makes her decide to hold off on killing them for now. Eventually, the two groups manage to come to an understanding, and Atu finds out that Tonukapali's group is actually an envoy from Dragonten. This is a stroke of luck since it will save her the trouble of having to go there herself, so she invites Tonukapali and her men to come meet the king of Manara. Tonukapali is a little nervous since a king who is capable of commanding someone as powerful as Atu is bound to be terrifying. And when she finally does meet Takuto, it's even worse than she could have imagined because all she can see is an endless abyss of darkness, so she's really starting to regret the decision she made earlier. Before they ran into Atu, the group was attacked by a giant in the barren lands, but Pipe, as one of the staff bearers, was able to use grass magic to find the giant and bring it to the ground. Unfortunately, his single-digit IQ makes it hard for him to think things through, so instead of finishing the giant off, he just stands on top of it and begins demanding praise for his magic. As expected, the giant eventually breaks itself free and throws Pepe to the ground, but just as it was about to squish him, Tonukapali came to the rescue and used both grass and earth magic to pin the giant against a rock. Tonukapali then proceeded to smack Pepe across the head and tell him he needs to stop acting like such an idiot, because as the only young staff bearer, lives will hang in the balance of his actions one day. Pepe tells her he will do his best, but he clearly doesn't understand the significance of his position. If Dragonten continues getting attacked by giants, then it will only be a matter of time before it is completely destroyed, but they have no idea what could be causing it to begin with. The only clue they had was the rumor of a calamity appearing in the accursed lands, so Tonukapali said she intended to go investigate and to teach Pepe a thing or two about responsibility. She forced him to come along, but now she's regretting that decision because one wrong move from him could get them all killed. A moment later, Pepe randomly speaks up and asks Takuto if he wants to be friends, and Tonukapali is freaking out because addressing a king directly in such a brazen manner could be grounds for execution. She apologizes and tries to make an excuse for Pepe's outburst. But to her surprise, Takuto genuinely seems to be happy about Pepe's offer to become friends, and he says he'd love to get along with him. After that, a feast is prepared to welcome Pepe and Tonukapali's group, and once everyone is seated, Maria and Karia serve them a glass of apple juice. Tonukapali takes a sip of the juice, and she's amazed because she has never tasted anything so delicious before, and the quality of the glassware here is far greater than the work of the greatest craftsman on the continent. Pepe also loves the juice, so he asks Maria for a refill, and before his extra juice even arrives, he jumps out of his chair and starts complimenting Gia on his huge muscles. He then goes to show off his magic to Moltar, and everyone just lets him do what he wants since Takuto seems to like him. Takuto is impressed by how social Pepe is no matter the situation, and he's glad that they were able to become friends, but he has never actually had a friend before, so he's not exactly sure what friends are supposed to do. While Pepe is busy getting yelled at by Tanukapoli, Takuto gets his attention and asks him if he'd like to play a game. The room goes silent for a moment since no one was expecting him to say that, and Takuto is starting to feel awkward, but then Pepe cheerfully agrees to play with him, so the two take a seat together. The first game they play is one that Pepe came up with, so the two of them each take a blade of grass, and they pull them against each other to see whose grass breaks first. Tanukapoli is worried that Takuto might feel insulted by such a simple game, but he's actually having a lot of fun. The two continue playing for a while longer, and Pepe ends up trying a bunch of the games that Takuto made. He says he had a lot of fun and even suggests that Takuto could sell these in Dragonten, but Tanukapoli cuts him off because it's not Pepe's place to make decisions like that. Takuto is actually glad that Pepe brought up the topic of trade since he intends to establish a trade relationship with Dragonten, but before that, he is going to have to set aside his friendship with Pepe and act strictly as a ruler. Once they are all done with their meal, Atu gets Tanukapoli's attention and asks her why exactly she came to the accursed lands in the first place. The question puts her on edge, but she answers that her country has come under constant attack from the barbarians. Atu is a little surprised that the barbarians are the ones attacking Dragonten since they usually avoid large cities, and Tanukaholi says that's precisely why she came here to investigate what the cause of the barbarians' behavior could be. Takuto asks her if that means they lack the military power to effectively fight the barbarians, and Tanukapoli's blood pressure spikes a little because if Takuto finds out how bad the situation in Dragonten is, Mainara may just try to conquer them instead of negotiating. She lies and says Dragonten still has enough strength to drive off the barbarians, but the unusual nature of their movements needed to be investigated regardless. Her argument managed to convince everyone there that Dragonten is still capable of handling itself, but then Pepe opens his big mouth and says he's confused because earlier, Tanukapoli told him that they were here because if they don't find out why the barbarians are attacking, then Dragonten would be doomed. Atu is starting to feel bad for Tanukapoli since she has to deal with Pepe all the time, but she and Takuto assure her that they harbor no ill intent for Dragonten, so she doesn't have to worry. Right now, they are much more focused on their domestic affairs, so they don't plan on starting any wars or conquering other nations anytime soon. But as for the matter of the barbarians, they can't simply ignore that. If Dragonten were to fall to the barbarians, then as the next closest kingdom, it is safe to assume that Mainara would be next, so this is their problem as well. Tanukapoli is stunned and asks if that means they are willing to offer their aid because in all honesty, with how much they overextended themselves to build a town near the Dragon Veen, Dragonten is bound to fall if nothing is done. Atu asks Takuto what he thinks they should do, and he says he wants to help his friend out, so he is willing to offer as much aid as necessary. Tanukapoli is thrilled to hear that, but she asks what he wants in return since thanks to Pepe's big mouth, they already know that Dragonten is in dire straits. Atu casually responds saying they want the Dragon Vein, and Tanukapoli was really hoping they wouldn't bring that up, but as things stand, she is in no position to refuse. Atu tells her she doesn't have to worry too much since she and Takuto are perfectly fine with sharing control of the Dragon Vein with Dragonten. After all, they don't really need much mana right now, but they want to reserve the exclusive right to choose the elemental conversion from the Dragon Vein. Tanukapoli is shocked to hear that Mainara already has the technology required to transform pure mana into elemental energy since it would have taken Dragonten another 10 years to perfect it. It is now clear to her that Mainara is a civilization that is far more advanced than their own, so forming an alliance with them would be incredibly beneficial. But in line with tradition, she tells Pepe that this is his call to make. He may be an idiot, but he is the youngest staff bearer and by extension, the future ruler of the nation. He also has a keen eye when it comes to evaluating people, so she asks him if he wants to go through with the alliance, and Pepe says he wants to be friends with everyone in Mainara, so the two kingdoms officially form an alliance. A little while later, Atu calls a meeting to discuss the terms of their deal with Dragonten. Mainara agrees to send consumable goods to their city, and in exchange, Dragonten will provide them with metal goods and daily necessities. Molter is pleased with the deal since till now, they have been relying on Takuto to provide those things, but by far their biggest gain from the agreement was access to the Dragon Vein. And they have Pepe to thank for how well things played out, because if he had revealed the true state of Dragonten, then Tanukapoli would have maintained her false confidence, and they probably wouldn't have made any significant headway as far as international relations go. And subsequently, Dragonten would have been destroyed long before Mainara could offer any aid, so Takuto is starting to wonder whether Pepe really is an idiot or maybe he planned the whole thing out to achieve the best outcome. Moving on, two suggest they should discuss how to handle relations with Dragonton from now on, but Maria and Caria seem a little lost, so they ask if anyone actually knows what kind of nation Dragonton is. They were all so focused on negotiations that they forgot that they'd never actually been to the nation in the first place, and a major part of maintaining international relations is understanding the culture and values of your allies. When Takuto used to play the game, he only ever had to click a button to establish friendly relations, so the thought never crossed his mind that he'd actually have to work to maintain the alliance now. Given how little they know about it, Atu suggests that their first step should be to investigate the capital, Crescent Moon, but is quite far from Minara, so investigating it would take a long time. Takuto says they can put that on hold for now since their main priority should be helping Dragon fight off the giants. However, Molter points out that paying a visit to another nation isn't something they can just do out of nowhere, because there are rules they need to follow. Maria and Caria raise their hands if it would be okay if they just went to play, and as childish as it may sound, it's actually a really good idea. If they treat it as a greeting before sending an official delegation, then they'll be able to head there right away. Moltar offers to go, but Takuto thinks he's a little too high-ranking to be sent as a messenger. To the other nation, Moltar would basically be Minara's highest magic chancellor, so he's a no-go. The same could be said for Gia and Emil since their positions are just as important. They would need someone who Takuto trusts, but who also isn't too highly ranked, and just then, Maria and Caria raise their hands to volunteer. Takuto immediately rejects the idea since he is worried it might be dangerous, and Atu offers to go instead, but Moltar reminds her that she's Takuto's most trusted confidant, so she's arguably the most important person here aside from Takuto himself. Just then, Maria and Caria approach Takuto, and they remind him that he gave them the freedom to make their own choices, so right now they want to do everything they can to help him, even if danger is involved. Takuto is reluctant to agree to send them on the mission, but he can't bring himself to say no to a face like that, so he eventually agrees to let them go, and Atu is jealous that Takuto gave in to the cuteness of someone other than her. Emil still has some concerns about sending those two alone, but Takuto says it's fine since he already has some good bodyguards in mind. After that, he heads back to his throne room, and Atu is still pouting over Takuto, giving in to Maria and Carrie's request, so he's not sure what to do. He turns to Maria for help, and she tells him he should just tell Atu exactly how he feels, so he's going to give it a shot. He goes up to Atu and apologizes for making her feel uneasy, but she doesn't have to worry about him replacing her. He is extremely thankful for everything Atu does for him, and the fact that she's always by his side. So he tells her there's no one he would rather be with, and that's all Atu needed to hear. In fact, she's already imagining a happily married life with Takuto, and he's not sure what she's thinking about, but he's glad she's not angry at him anymore. A little while later, Takuto takes Maria, Caria, and Atu to the clinic, but they aren't sure why he brought them here since none of them are sick. Takuto explains that the clinic was cheap to build, so he went ahead and did it on a whim, but since Maria and Caria are going to be going out on a mission, he figured he might as well send the new plague doctors he made along with them as bodyguards. Takuto introduces the doctors to everyone and informs Maria and Caria that these medics are not only capable of healing injuries and diseases, but also fighting to protect them on their journey. Atu steps up and informs the medics that they are officially being assigned to protect these two on their journey to Dragonton. Additionally, they are to observe and learn as much about the local culture as possible while they are there. The medics are excited for their mission, so they say they'll do their best to blend in with the humans and learn as much as they can. Takuto loves how enthusiastic they are, so he will grant them an early reward. He says from now on, they will have the names Ichiro, Jiro, and Saburo, and the medics are ecstatic over their new identities, so they are very grateful. But their enthusiasm is a little over the top, so Takuto and Atu are wondering if it's really a good idea to send them as the guards, and Caria doesn't seem to like them very much. However, Maria is having a lot of fun going along with their shenanigans. Meanwhile, over in Dragonton, the mayor and elf-named Antic is having a meltdown because she's been buried in paperwork all week. She only took this job because she thought it would give her a life of freedom from the stuck-up nation of elves, and maybe she'd be able to find a nice guy to settle down with, but all she got instead is a bad back from sitting at her desk all day and a drinking problem. Worst of all, she was recently told she'll have to work with the forces of darkness in order to protect the city, but she has never even heard of this Minara place before. Just then, Antic's assistant knocks on the door and it startles her, so she yells for the assistant to go away, but then she realizes that she's being unnecessarily mean, so she fixes her attitude and asks her assistant what she's here for. Antic's assistant tells her that there are people who want to meet with her, so Antic asks if these people have an appointment, and technically they don't, so she tells her assistant to get rid of them. She says her time is way too valuable to be wasted on random visitors, but then the assistant informs her that these visitors are emissaries from the nation of Minara, And as soon as Antic hears that, she realizes this is a top priority, so she immediately prepares some tea and goes to meet with Maria and Curia. Once she arrives at the meeting room, she introduces herself as the mayor of Dragonton and welcomes them. But she wasn't expecting the three dark figures behind Maria and Curia, so it catches her off guard a little. She wonders what Tenukapoli was thinking when she made an agreement with people like this, but it's her job to deal with them now, so she sits down and thanks them for coming all this way. Maria and Curia introduce themselves as the emissaries of Minara, and Antic praises them for being so polite, but internally the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that Maria and Curia are dark elves. She's also very suspicious of the three standing behind them because she assumes they must be dark elf assassins, but she can't let her suspicions show, so she keeps the discussion friendly. She apologizes for not having a proper welcome party for the two since she didn't know they were coming, but Maria and Curia say they don't mind. Now that Antic thinks about it, she recalls that Tenukapoli mentioned something about twin dark elves who were being trained by the king to become future leaders of Minara. And once she realizes that those twins are sitting right in front of her, she panics a little because if she does anything to upset them, it might destroy the relationship between Dragontan and Minara. She nervously asks what business the two are here for, but there isn't really an official reason, so Curia isn't sure what she should say. Just then, Jero speaks up, and he tells Antic that they are here in response to staff bearer Pepe's invitation to come and play. He says she should think of this as two students visiting to learn about the local culture, so they'd like to avoid any official discussions. Antic is relieved to hear that because it means they aren't here to begin negotiations on the terms of the alliance. It will save her a lot of trouble if Maria and Curia are truly only here as tourists, but she's still going to have to be careful not to offend them since she doesn't want an international incident on her hands. She tells the twins that they should feel free to stay as long as they'd like, and if they want, she's willing to give them a personal tour of the city. Maria and Curia ask if it's really alright, and Antic responds saying she knows every nook and cranny of the city, so she'd be the perfect guide for them. She really wants to make a good impression on the twins for the sake of improving Dragontan's relationship with Minara, and it also gives her an excuse to ditch her paperwork, so there's no way she'd pass up the opportunity. The group heads out into town, and Antic spends all day showing Maria and Curia around the city, and they all seem to be having good fun out there. Meanwhile, back in Minara, Takuto has been buried in his own mountain of paperwork, but he made sure to keep an eye on how things are going with Maria and Curia. And he's glad to see that they are enjoying themselves. Later that evening, Antic says goodbye to Maria and Curia, and once they return to their room, they decide to begin their review of today's events. Curia asks Maria what she thinks of the city so far, and Maria says the people in town seemed anxious. The sentiment was something along the lines of there's no food, the enemy is going to attack soon, and no one is coming to help. The medics are surprised that Maria was able to gather so much information since they didn't see her talking to any of the people, but Maria is just really good when it comes to understanding what other people feel like, so her judgment is always accurate. The medics are impressed because they had no idea Maria had such power, but that doesn't explain why she asked them to buy this for her. Jiro hands Maria a small bag, and she pulls out a plant, explaining that this is a piece of popple grass. Popple grass is an extremely potent narcotic, so practically every nation has banned it entirely, but Jiro managed to find a shady guy selling some at back alley. Granted, he didn't know what it was at the time, so he tells Maria that doing drugs is a no-no, so she should throw that away immediately. But what's more concerning is the fact that it was so easy to obtain in the city even though it's supposed to be banned. The group quickly comes to the conclusion that someone must be growing and distributing the popple grass within the city, and that's some dangerous business. Curia thinks it's awful that people would do such a thing when Antic is working so hard to keep the city running. But if things like drug trade are going on in the city, then Samuro says they are going to have to be even more careful about protecting the young ladies since there's no telling what else might happen in the city. The next day, the medics take Maria and Curia to see the dragon Veen, and they are amazed to see so many pretty crystals everywhere. But just then, a man named Vesta gets their attention, and he mentions how popple grass grows really well in this area. Curia remains polite and says it's nice to meet Vesta, but she says he should cut to the chase and state what business he has with them. Vesta says he heard that they are emissaries of the nation of Minara, and that in the near future, this land will be jointly governed by Dragontan and Minara, so he wants to propose a business deal. He asks Maria and Curia if they'd like to partner with him to grow popple grass, and Curia wants to see where this will go, so she asks Vesta what benefits Minara will receive if they decide to work with him. Vesta tells them that popple grass fetches a high price in the market, so naturally Minara would receive a portion of those profits, but he is also prepared to provide other offerings. Curia asks him what kind of offerings he's referring to, but it's far too illegal for him to talk about out here, so he asks Maria and Curia to meet him at a secluded location so they can discuss this further. He hands Carrie a map with the location of the meeting point, and she hesitates for a moment, but she does eventually take it from him. So Vesta says he's always happy to work with people who are evil-aligned because they always understand him. The current mayor of this city is always trying to push stupid policies like don't sell drugs or don't traffic people, but he's sure that when the king of Minara takes over, he will be much more open to the way Vesta does business. A few days later, Maria and Carrie are meeting with Antic again, and they'll be leaving town soon, so she says it's been great getting to know the twins. They thank Antic for being such a gracious host these past few days, and they ask if there's anything they can do for her in return. Antic says she'd appreciate it if they put in a good word for her the next time they talk to King Takuto, and Maria and Carrie say they'd be happy to oblige. Just then, the room door opens and Vesta walks in with two goons at his side. Antic gets up in a rage and yells that Vesta has no right to be here without her permission, but Vesta had already made it clear that he doesn't care about rules, so he just let himself in. He says he's here to hear the response from Maria and Carrie, since they never met him to discuss the details of the deal he proposed. Maria asks him if he's talking about the deal where he offered to sell popple grass with them, and Antic is starting to panic because she had no idea that Maria and Carrie made a deal with Vesta behind her back, and if Vesta managed to get Minara on his side, then the city is going to be ruined. Maria can tell what Antic is thinking, so she tells her she doesn't need to worry since neither of them would ever actually consider working with a scumbag like Vesta. They assumed he would be smart enough to figure out that the fact they didn't show up to the meeting he set up means they aren't interested. Carrie asks Antic if it would be alright for them to deal with Vesta themselves, since even though he's despicable, they'd hate to cause an international incident by acting on their own. Antic says they are more than welcome to step in because Vesta has been a nuisance to the people of the city for a long time, so on Maria and Carrie's orders, the medics step up to deal with Vesta. However, with those three standing in front of him, Vesta seems oddly confident because he has this with him. Inside the syringe is a concentrated extract from the popple flower, and one dose would be enough to turn anyone into a mindless drug addict. Maria and Carrie can already tell that he came here with the intention of using that on them, so they ask him if he really thought this through. They may be weak children, but if he were to lay hands on them, then he would be making an enemy out of the kingdom of Minara, and King Takuto surely won't take kindly to such provocation. However, Vesta, in his infinite wisdom, believes that he can just blackmail Takuto by turning Maria and Carrie into his personal slaves, completely failing to account for the three men protecting them. He hands the syringe over to his goons and tells them to go get the girls, but a second later, one of the goons' sword goes flying into the wall in front of Vesta, and he turns around to see the gruesome fate they suffered. Meanwhile, over in Minara, Takuto is having a relaxing cup of tea with a two, and he is really glad he made those medics because they really came in handy for the twins' mission. Speaking of which, Emil has been wondering why Takuto chose to send medics out instead of just sending a group of warriors with Maria and Carrie. So A2 explains that those three absolutely love humans and demi-humans, maybe a little too much in fact, because while they are well-versed in healing human biology, they also do eat brains from time to time, so they are truly terrifying when they want to be. Meanwhile, back in Dragonton, the medics have just finished dismembering the goons with surgical precision and are currently holding their skins up and jumping around in joy because it will go great in their collection. Antic falls to her knees in fear upon seeing the true forms of the medics, so Maria goes over to comfort her a little, but as for Vesta, what's about to happen to him will be anything but comforting. He tries to beg for forgiveness, but Carrie tells him he has already crossed the line. She wasn't going to do anything about him selling drugs since that much is none of her concern, but when he threatened her and her sister, as well as insulting her glorious King Takuto, he had already sealed his fate. She orders the medics to kill him, and a few minutes later, all three of them are casually cosplaying in Vesta's skin, and Antic doesn't know how to process what she just witnessed. Carrie comes up to her and apologizes for making such a mess in her office, and she asks if she wants them to cover the cleaning bill for it, but Antic nervously says that she doesn't need to worry about that. Carrie thanks Antic for being so understanding, and seeing Carrie's sincere smile despite the situation that just unfolded is somehow even more terrifying than the skin suit-wearing medics. She really wishes she hadn't become the mayor of this city, but this is her life now, so she's going to have to get used to it. Once the group returns to Minara, they immediately get called into a meeting so A2 can scold them for what happened. But before that, she demands to know why Takuto didn't stop them from doing all that when he was watching them the entire time. He admits that he just didn't want the girls to think he was helicopter parenting them, so he let them handle the situation on their own, but look where that got them. A2 specifically warned Maria and Carrie to keep their violent acts to a minimum, but they still went and eagerly ordered the medics to murder those people. And as for the medics, even if they had to kill Vesta and his goons, they went too far by skinning him alive in front of Antic. Atu tells everyone that none of them are moving from this spot until they've written a long essay promising to do better next time. A few hours later, everyone gathers in the meeting room to discuss the situation with Dragonten, and based on the report that the twins brought back, Dragonten is in dire straits right now. They lack the resources to properly maintain order, so criminal activity is on the rise, and on top of all that, they are facing constant attacks from the barbarians. The report says Dragonten is facing mainly goblins, orcs, and the occasional hill giant, and while the goblins and orcs aren't much of a threat, the giants have become a serious issue. They randomly appear in groups around the city, and with each passing day, the number of giant attacks is steadily increasing, so the city is having a hard time defending itself. Molter assumes the reason that the people of Dragonten haven't figured out the giants' attack patterns is because they lack the ability to detect incoming attacks. Normally, the heightened senses of beastmen would be more than enough to spot enemies before they attack, but the scouts must be exhausted after all the constant fighting. Either way, if nothing is done, the city of Dragonten is bound to fall in the near future, so Gia suggests that they should send a large force to bolster the city's defenses. Emil agrees that they should send aid, but she doesn't think dividing Minara's forces for it is a good idea. If they were to send their immediate labor reserves to Dragonten now, it would leave their farming and construction sectors understaffed. Atu interjects and reminds everyone that she'll be participating in the mission as well, so they won't need that many soldiers. The others are surprised to hear that, but considering Atu's ability to steal skills, it does make sense that she want to go. While she's gone, she's going to need someone to take over her administrative tasks, so Molter volunteers to handle the paperwork, and Gia says he'll take care of national defense, but as soon as Emil hears him say that, she is a little worried. Till now, Minara's national defense has relied heavily on Atu's presence, and no offense, but Gia alone ain't protecting shit if they come under attack. Gia can't deny that she's right, but fortunately, Takuto already thought of a solution for that, so he tells everyone that he will soon be creating the hero Isla, and she will be the cornerstone of their defense while Atu is gone. Molter says this is perfect timing since they have already gathered all the necessary materials like Takuto requested, and they all praise him for being able to plan ahead for a situation like this, but in reality, this was just dumb luck. Takuto had no idea they'd actually be using Isla this soon, but having them think of him as a master strategist is cool. Since they covered all the main concerns for this meeting, Atu asks Takuto if he has anything he'd like to add. The planning phase seems to have gone fairly well, and Takuto is surprised by how easy it was, because when he used to play the game in the hospital, he'd spend ages planning everything out all on his own, but now he has people he can rely on. He tells everyone that they are all doing a great job, and hearing the king praise their efforts motivates them to do even better in the future. Now that the meeting is over, Takuto heads outside to the mountain of resources that were prepared so he can finally create Isla. They had to ration a lot of their produce to prepare this much, but it's finally time for the investment to pay off. Maria and Karia ask what kind of person Isla is going to be, but honestly, Takuto has no idea because aside from Atu, Isla is going to be the first hero summoned to this world, so he's not sure how this is going to play out. Atu promises that on the off chance that Isla revolts and tries to kill Takuto, she will do everything in her power to protect him. Having Atu by his side reassures Takuto that everything is going to be okay, but he asks Atu to prioritize her own survival because she's too important to lose. Takuto begins the summoning process, and after all the resources are consumed, a cocoon is formed mid-air. Isla is going to emerge from it any minute, so Takuto tenses up in preparation, but it turns out that he was worried for nothing because the second Isla sees him, she bows her head and thanks Takuto for granting her the opportunity to speak to him. She introduces herself as the queen of all bugs and swears her undying loyalty to Takuto and the kingdom of Minara. Takuto is glad that Isla is still on his side, but just to make sure, he asks her if she remembers who he is. It takes a few moments, but she eventually recognizes him as the same Takuto who played the game for all those years. She says she's really glad to see him again, but before things get too personal, Atu steps in between them and asks Isla if she's truly serious about serving Takuto here. Isla also remembers Atu from back then, and she thinks it's cute that she's trying to be all serious, so she pats her on the head. Atu gets embarrassed and tells Isla to just answer the question already, so Isla says there's no one else she'd rather serve. Takuto was the only one who ever managed to bring out her full potential, so it's an honor to be working alongside him again. But speaking of work, she asked Takuto if he could fill her in on the current situation here since she's not sure what she's supposed to do. A little while later, Takuto, Atu, and Isla are all back at the palace and he has just finished explaining the situation. So Isla understands that she's meant to be acting as their defense hero for the time being. That means Atu is free to go on her mission without Minara being left vulnerable. However, even though she knows this is the best decision, Atu really doesn't want to go. Since they got here, she and Takuto have always been by each other's side. So this is the first time that they are going to be separated for an extended period of time, and they are going to miss each other a lot. The next morning, Atu and the squad of soldiers depart for Dragonton after she says goodbye to Takuto, and with Atu officially gone, it's time for Isla to get to work. She says she'll do her best to make sure Takuto enjoys this game, but after spending the first day with him, she realizes that Takuto can't actually do much on his own. It's noon already, but he's still fast asleep on his throne. Maria and Karia come out and tell Isla that Takuto always sleeps in until noon, and on days he sleeps past noon. Atu usually comes to wake him up. Isla doesn't think that's appropriate, so she tells Takuto that as king, he is setting a bad example by sleeping in so late. She wants him to get up earlier from now on, and Takuto promises to do his best, but Maria and Karia are surprised by how easy it was for Isla to convince him since Atu usually just lets Takuto do whatever he wants. Seeing the twins reminds Isla that she wanted to ask Takuto for a favor, so she tells him she would like to borrow Maria and Karia for the day. Takuto doesn't particularly mind, but he asks why she made the sudden request, so Isla explains that she was hoping to have them show her around the kingdom since she's not familiar with the area yet. Takuto thinks it's a good idea since it will give Isla a chance to properly plan out the kingdom's defenses, so he approves of the tour. While they are on the topic of approving things, Isla tells Takuto that his people will be arriving to get his approval soon, so he needs to make sure he handles it properly. Just then, Emil enters the room, so Isla and the twins excuse themselves. Emil walks up to Takuto and asks him to look over the labor reports for the week, so Takuto takes the papers, but he is extremely nervous because this is the first time he has had to speak to Emil without Atu or the twins present. Emil notices that Takuto isn't saying anything, so she asks him if there's something wrong with her report, but Takuto tells her that's not it. He thinks her labor allocation is good, but starting from next week, he asks her to cut back on the resource gathering since they don't need to acquire extra resources with Isla already summoned. Emil thanks him for the feedback and says she'll get on it right away, but Takuto is already exhausted from that one conversation. However, he's still got a lot of meetings left to get through, so it's going to be a really long day for him. Meanwhile, Isla and the twins are out on their walk, and Isla asks them to give her the rundown of all the facilities here in Mainara. They start by showing her the government office where all the paperwork is filed, but just then, they see Emil frantically walking around. Isla can see that she's upset, so she asks her if something is wrong since she looks awfully busy. So Emil explains that Gia has been burning through the training equipment, and it's messing up her monthly budget. Isla pats Emil on the head and tells her that everything's going to be okay. She even offers to scold Gia personally for being so wasteful, and that makes Emil feel a lot better. A little while later, they all head to the training center to wait for Gia, and the second he arrives, he dashes past all the soldiers and shatters their swords to show them how weak they are. This is exactly what Emil was complaining about, so Isla goes up to Gia and asks him if he really thinks breaking equipment like that was necessary to prove his point. Gia starts stammering out an apology since he gets a little excited when it comes to training and he hadn't realized how much damage he was doing. Isla pats him on the head and says it's okay as long as he realizes his mistake, but he needs to make sure to think about his actions carefully next time. Just then, Isla hears a bell ring, so she asks the twins what that means, and they explain that it means it's time for dinner. They invite Isla to come join them, so everyone gathers in the main square to eat. Food is served like this because it's a lot less wasteful to have everyone eat dinner together, rather than have them make separate meals. The Dark Elves inform Isla that if she chooses to join them, a lavish dinner has been prepared in her honor. The elves try to convince her to use the fancy plates since it would be disrespectful of them to allow her to use such basic cutlery, but Isla reminds them all that she is the defense hero, so her job is to defend the kingdom and its people, and for her to fulfill her duty properly, it's important that she shares the same experience as the people. Later that night, Isla is taking a walk through town by herself to come up with defense strategies when she hears some noise coming from Maria and Karia's house. She goes in to take a look and she is surprised to see the two of them huddled up in a corner and crying. She asks them what's wrong, so they tell her that they had a dream and now they can't sleep. Isla asks them if they'd like to talk about it. So they explain that every other night they have a dream about their mother and all the fun times they had with her. But when they wake up, they are reminded that they can never see her again, and it makes them really sad. However, those dreams have been much less frequent since they met Takuto, and this was the first time it happened in a long while, so there's no need for Isla to worry about them. Isla is still a little concerned for the twins, so she suggests staying with them for the night. That way, if they wake up crying again, she'll be there to comfort them, and the twins feel a lot better with Isla by their side. The next morning, Isla goes to meet with Takuto to discuss a few things, and they come to the consensus that building a learning institution would be the best option for their next construction project. After all, they aren't currently at war, so there's no need to add to their defenses anymore. Speaking of wars, Isla asks Takuto how Atu is doing over in Dragonton, so he uses his shared senses to check in on her, and gets a little excited by what he sees because Atu is in a very interesting situation right now. This was the end of episode 9. Subscribe to not miss the next part.